Okay, very good. All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to our workshop today. The topic of today's workshop is Certified Naturally Grown. I'm Patrick Byers. I'll be your presenter. I'm a horticulture field specialist with University of Missouri Extension. I'm based in Southwest Missouri. And again, as I mentioned, I'll be your presenter. Joining me on the presentation is Hannah Hodge. And Hannah, we're having some issues with your audio, but Hannah is with me and she'll be co-moderating. And as we go through the presentation, we're going to invite questions to come in through the chat. And if you're new to Zoom presentations, new to the Zoom platform, along the bottom of your screen, there's several buttons, and there's a button called chat, and you click on that chat, and that brings up a window where you can type in a question. And Hannah will be keeping an eye on the chat for me. And as we go through the presentation, if we have questions, we'll go ahead and stop and address those. And another good time, of course, to tackle questions will be at the very end. The presentation today is in two parts. We'll start out with a narrated PowerPoint at the very beginning just to give you some background on Certified Naturally Grown. And then I'm really excited to share with you a video of an on-farm inspection that I conducted with farmer Kevin Prather. And you'll learn more about Kevin and his farm Hazel Pine during the recorded interview. Now the interview is recorded, so we're not interacting with Kevin live, but if you have any questions related to Hazel Pine and farming practices there, please put those in chat as well. And I think based on my conversations with Kevin, we can tackle those at that time. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. I do want to acknowledge my collaborator on today's program, and that is Springfield Community Gardens. And the vision of Springfield Community Gardens is a community where everyone has access to healthy local food. Springfield Community Gardens is a nonprofit organization. It's volunteer driven. We do have staff, and they, again, are doing exciting things in the Springfield metro area and in Southwest Missouri, in fact, to help build our local food system. And it's a pleasure to be collaborating with them on today's workshop. I also want to acknowledge our funders. Springfield Community Gardens has successfully competed for several USDA grants to help support beginning farmers. And today's workshop is part of one of those grants. And we want to certainly acknowledge that contribution and also acknowledge the interest that USDA has in small-scale farms. The Farm Services Agency, which has an office in most counties in Missouri, is the entry point for these programs. And I would encourage anyone with an interest in specialty crop farming to reach out to their Farm Services Agency office. In that office, typically there are staff people from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS. And NRCS in particular has several exciting programs to support specialty crop production. An example would be the High Tunnel Cost Share Initiative. There are others as well that can help support activities on farm. So reach out and get to know your NRCS staff members. The Risk Management Agency is another branch of USDA, and among the programs offered by RMA are crop insurance programs that are now beginning to focus on specialty crop production. Information on all of these programs, both through RMA and NRCS, is available at the farmers.gov resources website. So please check that out. So our workshop today, this is the outline of what we're going to do. As I mentioned, we'll start off with some background information on Certified Naturally Grown. We'll talk about the types of certifications that CNG, or Certified Naturally Grown, offers. We'll talk about the produce standards, since that's the focus for today's workshop is on produce. We'll talk about the annual requirements for a CNG certification. We'll talk about the allowed, restricted, and prohibited inputs. CNG, again, is a certification for crops grown under natural growing conditions, and there are certainly some inputs that are not allowed for CNG farmers. We'll talk about the certification process, and then we'll watch our video on the farm inspection. A bit of history. So in 1990, the Congress established the National Organic Program, or the NOP. And this was groundbreaking work from the standpoint of the federal government. It established the NOP, which is part of USDA, and it also allowed for what is called organic certification. And again, this is a process to certify that farms are abiding by the standards established by the NOP. And we'll talk more about what these standards are. And this program was widely embraced. As I mentioned, it was a serious effort from the standpoint of the federal government to regulate organic production. And it has been very useful, particularly for mid and large size farms that are interested in organic production practices. In 2002, this was the year that the NOP standards came into play. This was also the year that a group of farmers in New York, small-scale farmers, recognized that the NOP program, again, was excellent for medium and large-scale farms, but there was some opportunity for an alternative program for small-scale farms. And they developed what is called the Certified Naturally Grown, or CNG program. It's still headquartered in New York. We'll see their website here in a moment. And we'll talk more about what CNG here is here in a moment as well. I do want to issue a disclaimer. Today's presentation is for informational purposes only, and will be focused on the Certified Naturally Grown program, but that does not imply endorsement of that program by University of Missouri Extension or by myself. I have been an inspector for CNG farms and have knowledge of the program, and that's why I've chosen to use this program as an illustration of natural farming practices. But certainly there are other programs out there, particularly organic certification programs, that fulfill the same need for farms. So what is certified naturally grown? Well, it's a complement to organic certification. Farmers who are certified naturally grown farmers use the same standards as certified organic farmers. They don't use synthetic herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers, or genetically modified organisms. CNG offers certification for livestock operations, and these livestock are raised primarily on pasture and with space for freedom of movement. And the feed used in livestock operations is grown without synthetic inputs or genetically modified seed. So again, they are mirror programs, and they basically adhere to the same standards. Now, how do they differ from certified organic? Well, Certified Naturally Grown is a private nonprofit organization. It's not affiliated with the National Organic Program. It abides by the same standards, but it's certainly not part of the USDA NOP program. The certification approach for CNG farmers uses what's called the Participatory Guarantee System. That's abbreviated as PGS. And the way this works is that the review of a farm's practices in order to meet CNG standards is typically conducted by another farmer, typically conducted by a farmer who themselves is CNG certified. And this model promotes farmer-to-farmer knowledge sharing. It's very effective from that standpoint. And certainly, that interaction among peers becomes a strength of Certified Naturally Grown. The Certified Naturally Grown program has as one of its goals to minimize paperwork, and it also keeps the certification dues affordable. Again, it's a program that is well suited for smaller scale farms. And the CNG certification process is transparent and open to the public. And there's information on the process on the CNG website. So if there's ever any questions from the standpoint of the public, it's very easy to refer to the CNG website and learn what that process is. Some more considerations. CNG is most useful for small-scale direct market farms. And the group that established CNG recognized that this was likely going to be the ongoing niche for CNG certification, and that has been indeed the case. As is the case with organic certification, CNG also offers transitional certification. This is certification for new farms or farms that are attempting to achieve certification but may have used some prohibited inputs within the past 36 months. So there is an option for transitional certification with CNG. Now, CNG farms cannot use the term organic. In the United States, the term organic is a defined term by federal legislation. Now, there is an exemption from, well, to back up, before a farm can use the term organic to describe crops or products, the cropping system, the farm itself, or the manufacturing system has to undergo a certification process. In other words, an inspection by a recognized certification agency. And once a farm has passed that, then they can use the term organic. Now, in the United States as well, there is an exemption for small-scale farms. A farm that has less than $5,000 in annual gross sales of organic products can use the term organic without undergoing an organic certification. Now, those farms have to abide by all of the regulations surrounding an organic certification. They just don't have to undergo the certification itself. They also don't have to maintain the records that are associated with organic certification. There are some records that these farms should be keeping. There are no records required, but they should be keeping records to document that they are indeed eligible for the organic exemption. CNG farms cannot use the USDA organic seal likewise unless they are also organic certified. And CNG does not offer certification of hydroponic production. Hydroponic production typically uses synthetic fertilizers from the standpoint of an input, and these fertilizers are prohibited under CNG standards. Now, CNG offers a number of different certifications. The one that I am most familiar with, of course, is the certification standard for produce and flowers, but there are also certification standards for mushrooms, aquaponics, apiary or beekeeping, and livestock. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in the certifications to visit the CNG website and learn more about the specific certification standards. Today, we're going to focus primarily on the produce standards. And the produce standards include a number of different sections, a number of different provisions. First of all, there's a section on allowed and prohibited substances, methods, and ingredients in CNG production. And we'll talk a bit about that here in just a moment. There are also standards related to land requirements. And these would be related to things such as management of pollinator and beneficial habitat on the farm, also management of areas adjacent to waterways and other sensitive areas that might be present on a farm. There are standards related to soil fertility and crop nutrient management, standards related to seeds and planting stock, standards related to crop rotation practices. There is a section of standards that are related to managing problems, crop pest, weed, and disease management. There are provisions within the produce standards to allow for wild crop harvesting. So again, the harvest of crops grown in wild settings, and that's related to land use in those areas. And then there are some special produce standards that are in place as well. You know, for example, with older apple orchards, an older orchard, I believe there's a higher risk of heavy metal contamination in older apple orchards, and the standards require that the soil be tested for heavy metal levels. So again, more information on the produce standards are available on the CNG website. Now let's talk about the inputs. And I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail here. There's more information on the CNG website, but inputs are basically materials or processes that are used to produce the crop. These inputs may come from on-farm or they may come from off the farm. From the standpoint of CNG, though, there are three categories. There are allowed inputs, there are restricted inputs, and there are prohibited inputs. And let's start with the allowed inputs. From the standpoint of fertility management in general, CNG allows for animal and plant products, compost, compost teas, cover crops, and rock minerals.
Hey, Patrick, can you hear me?
From the standpoint of pest management, the inputs are primarily related to naturally mined substances or substances that are derived from plants or animals, you know, biological or microbial products, for example, diatomaceous earth, hydrogen peroxide. Practices such as insect netting are certainly encouraged under CNG standards. Minerals, certain types of oils, pheromones and pheromone traps, plant-derived substances, row covers, certain types of soaps. Under certain circumstances, streptomycin and tetracycline are allowed, and this is primarily for fire blight control on apples and pears. Sticky traps to catch insects, sulfur dioxide and vitamin D3 are also allowed inputs. From the standpoint of weed management, certainly mulching of various types is allowed. Naturally derived mulches are allowed, but these cannot contain dyes or synthetic compounds. Paper pot transplanters are allowed. Plastic tarps are allowed, particularly from the standpoint of occultation, but they must be removed at the end of the season. Horticultural vinegar is allowed, row covers and frost cloth are allowed, and weed barriers too, again, as long as they're removed at the end of the season in the case of annual crops. There are some provisions for longer term use of weed barriers or plastics on perennial cropping systems. But again, the goal here is to keep these inputs from fragmenting, breaking down, and becoming mixed with the soil and becoming a problem. Restricted inputs, again, high salt content fertilizers, for example, there must be a plan to limit salt accumulation. The use of raw manures, the NOP standards, which are in place related to 120 days before harvest for raw manures for crops that contact the soil and 90 days for crops where the harvested part does not contact the soil, are also part of the CNG standard. Chilean nitrate, only 20% of the crop's total nitrogen requirement can come from this source. There are some synthetic micronutrients that are allowed under restriction. Boric acid, again, only if there's no direct contact with organic food or crops. Lots of concern about copper use and accumulation in the soil. And copper is allowed as a restricted input under CNG, but it must be used in a manner that prevents accumulation. Non-detergent soaps are allowed. Herbicidal soaps are allowed as well. But again, both of these have to be used in accordance with their labels and also in accordance with CNG standards. So visit the website to learn more about soap use. And then there's a list of prohibited inputs. And again, these are primarily synthetically derived inputs or inputs that have other concerns related to their use in organic production systems. And I'm not going to go through all these materials. Again, I encourage anyone with an interest to visit the Certified Naturally Grown website to learn more about these particular prohibited inputs. Now, what does the Certified Naturally Grown certification process looks like? Well, the first step, of course, is to learn more about the program. And a good place to do that is the website. Visit the website and learn about the different types of certifications and learn about the standards for each one of the certifications. If it looks like it's going to be of interest, then the farm is encouraged to submit an application for approval. And this is a very straightforward process that can be done over the internet. Once the CNG organization approves the application, then the farmer is encouraged to fill out a signed declaration. I'll show you what that looks like here in a moment. There is a recommended membership due of $200 or more per year. Again, this is recommended. The actual amount is flexible. There are programs in place to help support low farms that have difficulty making that $200 limit, as far as the cost. So again, CNG has a great deal of flexibility from the standpoint of membership dues. And then the third requirement is the on-site inspection, which of course we'll be talking about in detail in the course of our video. Once a farm becomes certified naturally grown, then there's an expectation that the farmer from that farm will themselves conduct a CNG inspection. This is called the work requirement. This is one of the strengths of CNG. Again, it helps build peer relationships, farmer-to-farmer relationships, and has, again, that participatory approach is a strength from the standpoint of maintaining the validity of CNG certification. And then there is some record keeping that is recommended. The record keeping is generally not onerous, but there are some records that will need to be kept. This is the declaration, and again, this is where the farmer, basically raises their right hand and says, "I declare and affirm that the information submitted is correct and accurate. I read and understand the appropriate CNG standards, and my practices adhere to the requirements listed. I understand that my certification can be removed if I do not adhere to the standards. And I recognize that I only represent products of CNG grown when they actually meet the standards." And so again, there's a certain amount of trust inherent in the CNG process, but it has been very successful over the years that it's been in place. And there are very few situations where farms have had their certification lost because of misrepresentation or downright fraud. The records that should be kept, receipts and orders of seed and transplant orders, any purchased soil amendment items, things such as off-farm compost, rock powders, organic fertilizers, and any purchased botanical or biological pesticides, so BT, sulfur, insecticidal soap. An updated copy of the application should be kept. If you're using chelated micronutrients to correct a soil deficiency, you must have soil tests in place that note that deficiency. In other words, you must have documentation that indicates the need for chelated micronutrients. And there's some additional record-keeping requirements for mushroom and aquaponic certifications. The inspection. Now, who does the inspection? As I mentioned, the participatory program in place with CNG encourages CNG certified farmers to also conduct inspections, and the majority of CNG inspections are carried out by other farmers. There are provisions for others to conduct inspections, in particular if there's not a CNG certified farmer that is conveniently located relative to the farm that's seeking the inspection. Certainly other producers who have experience with natural practices can conduct inspections. Representatives of governmental agencies such as extension agents, soil and water conservation district agents, and master gardeners with experience can conduct inspections. There's a provision for members of the public to conduct inspections. There must be 3 or more, though, for this to be valid. And educators with experience in natural production practices can also carry out inspections. So what happens during an inspection? Well, the first step is on the part of the farmer, and a complete list of inputs is developed. This can be developed in advance of the inspection, or it can be developed in the course of the inspection. It's also critically important that the farmer cooperate openly and fully with the inspector. Again, as I mentioned, an important aspect of CNG certification is that openness, that sharing of information, and quite frankly, the honesty of both parties. And then the final requirement of the farmer is to complete what's called sustainability goals. And this generally takes place following the inspection. It can also be part of the inspection itself, but this is where the farmer looks at their farm and their farming practices and develops a plan for the future. It's been my experience that with most sustainable farms, there's always more that could be done. And here is a chance for a farmer to develop a plan to work towards some of these goals. What does the inspector do? Well, the inspector uses the CNG standard forms to discuss and evaluate all aspects of the standard with the farmer. And then the responses are rated as best option, not applicable, or corrective actions needed. There is an expectation that if there are any deficiencies noted, that these will be corrected, and then perhaps a reinspection will take place. And there have been on occasion situations where farms have not passed inspection, but in most cases a farm that is seriously committed to organic or sustainable production practices will pass the inspection. Okay, Hannah, I don't know if your microphone is back. Do we have any questions in the chat? Maybe give me a sign. Okay.
Can you hear me?
I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here. And I will also take, let's see, we don't have any questions in the chat. I'm going to also turn off my video and my microphone, and then we'll go to the video. And I think before I turn my microphone off, Hannah, I'm going to ask for you to give me a sound check on the video.
Okay. Can you hear me?
And Hannah, if you want to just give me a thumbs up or something as the video starts, that would be great. Okay, thank you.
No sound. No sound.
Okay, now let me try that again. Okay, Hannah, again, if you don't mind, give me a thumbs up as we get into this.
There's no sound. There's no sound. Hey, Patrick, there's no sound in the video.
Okay, let me try again.
I'm not entirely sure what's going on, and I don't understand why. I've tried it on my iPad, my computer, and my phone to dial in.
Okay, I'll try again.
Okay, I'm going to join with audio,
Okay.
with dial-in audio with a 417 number. Do you mind unmuting me if I chat you the number?
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
Okay, we'll try that again, folks. I'm sorry, we seem to be having some issues with the video here.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay.
Patrick, can you hear me?
Hannah, I don't know if you can reach out to me one way or another, but we'll go ahead and give this a try. And
Okay.
folks, if you don't mind, if you're having issues, go ahead and enter the question in the chat.
So the inspection process is a very important part of achieving certified natural growth status. And inspection is an in-depth look at all aspects of the farm.
Is it any better?
Yeah, I can hear it, but now I can hear you.
inspection for your farm. So now we'll do the inspection. Now, there are several worksheets that we'll fill out, and those worksheets, again, are intended to give CNG a clear picture of going on the farm. So we'll go through that material. Not all of the questions on the forms will be applicable, but we'll go ahead and go through those and capture the reality of what's happening here at Hazel Pine. Now, there may be some places where the farming practices are not directly in line with CNG standards, and that's fine as well. In fact, very few farms are completely in line with CNG standards, but that's fine because the CNG process allows for farms to change practices so that they are in alignment with CNG status. So we'll go through that as well. Now, the first step typically is what's called the list of inputs. And the list of inputs is basically a discussion of what is used on the farm as far as inputs, what is coming into the farming practices from outside. And this could be a broad range of things. It could be organic materials, it could be pest management chemicals, it could be other things as well. And we'll go through that initially, and we're going to focus on fertility management and pest management and soil management. So if you don't mind, Kevin, let's go through this fairly quickly. And let's start with a discussion of fertility.
Sure.
And from the standpoint of managing fertility on the farm, what do you bring in as far as inputs?
Well, this farm has only been here for about 3 months, and the native soil was actually quite nice, so I haven't had to do much amending. We did buy some Hansen's organic compost. While we will be practicing no-till culture, we did originally till because this was full of Bermuda grass. We had a hard deadline to come up against, so when we tilled to get rid of the Bermuda grass, expecting it to come back, we tilled in Hansen's organic compost into the initial planting, and then we top dressed with Hansen's organic compost as well. For the tomatoes in the tomato house, I have used Job's organic fertilizer, which is essentially pelleted chicken manure, but that is also certified organic. I've also used Neptune's Harvest fish emulsion to boost the available nitrogen for a few of the crops.
Okay. How frequently do you use the Neptune's Harvest?
We've probably used that a total of 3 times, probably once a week for about 3 weeks, just getting started.
Okay, very good.
I think a little bit of the nitrogen was tied up in the compost, so it needed a little bit more.
Okay. What about weed management?
Lots of hand pulling. We do not use anything, any chemical or product for weed management.
Okay, very good. How about pest management, such as insects or those sorts of pests?
Early in the season, we did have an explosion of caterpillars, so we did use Dipel Pro brand BT.
That's a BT formulation?
Yep.
Okay.
And the first time, it really wasn't sticking, so we did add some organic neem oil as well to get it to cling to the leaves a little bit better, and that has been successful. We have applied that, I would say, no more than 3 times. We did a 3-week stint once weekly.
Okay, so you used the BT 3 times, and then maybe the second and third applications had the
yes,
the
that is correct.
Okay. Okay, very good. Let's see. Any disease management practices? Anything that you bring in for disease management?
We would get rid of. We just have been pulling off the leaves that look like they are diseased, figuring out what it is, and
any sort of input. You've been managing strictly with sanitation and
correct
those approaches. Okay, so as far as inputs, then I have the organic compost, the Job's organic fertilizer, Neptune's Harvest fish emulsion, BT, and then organic neem.
Yep.
Is that pretty much
everything.
The list?
And just for fun, I brought this out for you as well. This is the Hansen's OMRI list documentation for their compost.
And that brings up one of the questions on the inspection form is how do you determine if a product would be approved for CNG use?
Sure. Well, the CNG website is actually that's definitely the best place to start. They have a very thorough list of stuff you can use and specific things you cannot use, but then they also give you guidelines to figure it out if it's not on the list. There could be some organic products that might not have made the list, but they also tout OMRI listing, the certifier for organic, as a great place to start with that.
Yeah. In fact, OMRI and CNG are pretty much in alignment as far as the materials here. Okay, very good. Yeah, I'm glad you have that on hand. In your field, in your experience, are there any inputs that could be eliminated or reduced through cultural practices? And I mean, you touched on this already with your weed management strategy and also the disease management strategy. What about the insect management strategy?
I do believe that I could use, even though I've only used it 3 times, I still think that it is theoretically possible to cut out the BT by using exclusionary methods for the high tunnel. So putting up insect netting around it to just keep anything from getting to it in the first place.
Very good. All right, well that I think pretty much takes us through the list of inputs. An important part of maintaining certified naturally grown status or certification is understanding the inputs that go into producing a crop. And soil blocks are a great example. Kevin, if you don't mind, tell us a bit about the soil blocks, the folks who are making them, and the inputs that go into these soil blocks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, this is Liz and Justin. They're our 2020 apprentices here at Hazel Pine, and they are doing an excellent job over here making these soil blocks. We use these instead of plug trays because it ends up being a lot less plastic, first of all, and it's a lot better for the health of the plant and the growth of the roots. As you can see from the block that Patrick is holding here, it's self-contained. There's no plastic around it, meaning if the roots touch the outside instead of twirling around, spinning and getting root bound, they actually just self-prune themselves because of the air around the block.
So what actually goes into making a soil block?
We typically would use a 50-50 split between a high-quality potting mix like Happy Frog and compost. But the compost we have right now is a little bit too hot, so we're just using straight Happy Frog.
Very good, very good.
It doesn't stay together quite as well that way, but it ends up with a lot more nutrition.
But again, another example of using inputs that are sustainable, that would meet certified naturally grown standards. Well, Kevin, let's turn our attention to soil and soil management here at Hazel Pine. And again, the forms are set up so that we go through a number of different practices, and basically it's a yes-no situation. And there may be some points for further discussion, but
sure.
From the standpoint of soil management, a number of practices meet CNG standards, and we'll go through those, and you can tell me which ones you practice or are part of the plan. I know this is a relatively new farm. Crop rotation.
Yes.
Rest or fallow periods.
Yes.
Annual perennial cover crops.
Yes.
Use of compost, we know that's yes. Practices to minimize bare soil.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely, very good. Surface plant residue maintenance.
Meaning removal of it?
I think the point here is to maintain something covering the surface at all times. And we've talked about mulch, we've talked about cover crops, but there may be some situations where you just have to rely upon residue from the crop.
Okay, I probably would not use crop residue, but I would use tarps or something of the sort.
Okay. Contour plowing.
No.
Okay. Permanent bed systems, no
Yes.
till. Okay. And tillage practices designed to reduce compaction.
Yes, being that we are tilling one time to get the bed started, and that was it.
Okay. Another practice, though, that I don't know if it is pointed out on here, but you know, the idea of having permanent beds and permanent walkways. That way you keep traffic in areas that are not going to be production areas, and you keep traffic off of areas where your goal is to maintain soil structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Let's talk about I know we talked about this with the list of inputs, but now compost, mineral amendments, or other approved fertilizers. So thinking about those types of inputs, do you use them only as needed? In other words, according to a soil test or some sort of bioindicator, you know,
yes.
plant appearance or something like that. Okay. Made of known and CNG approved ingredients.
Yes.
Okay. Do you plan to use soil building techniques in the future?
Absolutely.
Okay. Very good. Do you use any synthetic fertilizers?
Nope.
Okay. Is raw or partially composted manure used?
I don't, you know, that's an interesting question. I don't have a list of inputs for the Hansons. Oh, partially composted, no.
Okay.
I'll mention this. I mean, you're not using partially composted manure, but I'll mention this because this is a good thing to always keep in mind when using compost, and especially if you can't verify that it, if there's a manure component that it's being completely composted. But if manure is used, it should be applied at least 120 days before harvest if the edible part of the crop comes into contact with the soil, right, or 90 days of harvest if the edible portion does not come into contact with the soil.
I think I got caught up on the word manure without hearing the rest of the question.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, very good. Now, some more amendments here to talk about, the amendments that you're using. We've got several options here. First of all amendments are produced on the farm, and the answer to that is no. You're bringing in some external amendments. Most amendments are produced on farm with minimal external additions. I probably can't say that either. But this third one, some are produced on the farm and some are external.
I don't think that we're producing any. We don't have our composting system operational now, so I can't even include compost in that.
Do you have plans for that in the future?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So we'll go ahead and check none are produced on the farm, all are external. Okay. Soil testing. I know this is a relatively new farm, but tell me about your soil testing.
I have not actually gotten a soil test here yet.
Okay, is that in your plan?
It is absolutely in my plan. I had a soil test 5 years ago on this property. And it came back pretty good, but I can't be specific about it. But that was a long time ago.
Okay. Is your goal to test the soil at fairly frequent intervals, say more than once a year?
Yeah, I'd like to do a soil test every 6 months to track our progress.
Okay, very good. Let's see. I think that pretty much takes us through the questions as far as soil and fertility management. There'll be a place where you can talk about your plan moving ahead, and that's where you want to highlight things such as your plans for developing a soil testing protocol.
Sure.
Okay, very good. Soil health is critical to the sustainability of a farm, and Certified Naturally Grown has a strong emphasis on maintaining soil health. Part of the inspection process is to do an assessment of the condition of soil health on the farm. And an easy way to do that, of course, is to excavate an area in a bed and take a look at it. But before we do that, I wanted to point out that an important part of sustainability, too, is maintaining soil structure. And in this particular farm, there are distinct areas for the beds and distinct areas for the walkways. So in other words, people walk on the walkways, they don't walk on the beds. And that's huge from the standpoint of maintaining soil structure and avoiding compaction. Let's take a look at what's going on here in the soil at Hazel Pine. We have a nice layer of mulch on the soil surface. Again, that is very helpful from the standpoint of maintaining soil health. We'll get down to the soil here and we'll excavate a shovelful. Okay, we'll notice that this soil has good structure. There's obviously a sufficient amount of pore space in the soil to allow for good water infiltration, and also for the gas exchange that is important for the respiration of plant roots and the organisms that live in the soil. I can see some evidence of worm trails in here, so obviously we have life in the soil. If we could take this sample of this soil and look at it under a microscope, we would be amazed with the diversity of bacteria, fungi, and other organisms. In fact, I just saw a little rascal there. Oh, he got away. So there's obviously life in the soil. The soil has good structure. It's arranged in 3 dimensions. It's not compacted. You can see how nicely it fragments when we work with our fingers. We've had rain recently, but the soil is not waterlogged, so obviously there's good water infiltration characteristics in the soil as well. So again, we can actually see some evidence here of fungal hyphae. So again, a nice example of a soil that has a good level of soil health, and the farmer is doing a fabulous job of enhancing and maintaining soil health in this farm. This definitely would meet Certified Naturally Grown standards. All right, let's talk about weeds. Tell me about your weed management strategy.
So far, it's been all physical removal and weed suppression barriers. So we do have black plastic underneath a couple inches of mulch here, but we will be certain to pull that up before it begins to photodegrade and become, such a small particle that we can't pick them up. We also just are out there weekly, just pulling weeds from the aisles and the beds. We'll use other cultural techniques like different types of hose and things like that. but it's mostly just pulling them out when we see them.
Okay, very good. So no herbicides and no plans to use herbicides?
That is correct.
Okay, so now again we have a checklist similar to what we talked about with soil. And let me know which of these practices you use. Dense planting,
Yes.
targeted watering and fertilizing,
Yeah, through drip tape. Drip tape.
living mulches,
Not in the production area.
okay? Cover cropping for weed control.
Yes,
Don't allow weeds to go to seed.
absolutely.
Absolutely. Solarization,
Yep.
tarping, occultation,
Yes.
mulching,
Yeah.
flame weeding,
Oh yeah, that's probably the most fun.
mowing,
Yes,
okay? Timely weeding by hand,
absolutely.
manual removal, hand weeding, hoeing, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Tractor cultivation, and that would include BCS,
Yes, that one initial till.
okay? And stale seed bedding,
Yeah.
okay, very good. All mulches are biodegradable and not manufactured.
So no,
Okay.
the mulch that I have, the plastic mulch that I have underneath this wood mulch is not biodegradable.
Okay. So you could say accurately that you're using plastic mulch that is removed at the end of each season or each cycle.
There is an asterisk on the CNG website that talks about for people, we are growing all 4 seasons, so there isn't an end of the season, so to speak. So I think that would put us in the perennial cropping category,
Okay.
where the asterisk is just that it's removed before it becomes broken up in such a way that
Right.
you can't remove it.
And are you using any, you mentioned perennial production systems, are you using any sort of synthetic mulches, woven landscape fabric, et cetera, that would be for longer periods of time?
Not so far,
Okay.
and I don't really believe that we have plans to use
Okay,
that.
very good. All right, well that takes care of the weed discussion. Now let's turn our attention to pest management. And again, we'll go through that similar process where we'll talk about practices and we'll talk about your current practices and some of your plans for the future. So frequency of monitoring, important part of integrated pest management is looking at the crops and looking for evidence of pest presence. So how frequently do you monitor crops?
I try to build in crop monitoring with harvesting, and so long as this farm's been around, we've been harvesting about 2 times a week. So I would say 2 times a week, if not more than that. I'd like to switch to daily field walks in the morning when you have the highest visibility of the pests anyway.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay, so when you're doing your monitoring, do you keep records? Anything written down?
I have not so far, but I very much plan to.
Okay. Connecting monitoring with management practices. So when you make a decision such as the use of BT, that's based upon monitoring, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. So management is based on real-time monitoring of insect populations or crop damage.
Yes,
So,
and we try to respond immediately, and that I think is how the writing it down step has gone missed.
okay. Very good. Okay, so now here's that checklist. Ways that you can manage through cultural or physical practices. Do you use adjusted planting schedules?
I haven't yet, but I'm prepared to.
Okay. Altered timing of disturbances. In other words, when you're tilling, when you're mowing, those sorts of things based upon pest issues.
Again, as young as this farm is, we haven't had to, but I would definitely consider that.
Okay. Release of predatory insects.
Yes.
Okay. Maintenance of insectaries. In other words, habitat areas.
Yeah.
Okay. Permanent habitat for pest predators.
Yeah, we have a dragonfly pond over there to attract dragonfly. Well, I guess that's more for mosquitoes for our comfort than any other things. But yeah, we have large perennial areas on the outskirts of the farm as well.
Okay. Trap crops.
Yes.
Cover crops to break pest cycles.
Yes.
Manual removal.
That's the primary one.
Okay. Physical barriers such as row covers.
We have not yet, but we just yesterday actually made our little wickets to elevate the fabric over our plants.
Okay. Crop rotation.
Yes.
Selecting pest-resistant varieties.
Yes.
Okay. Diversity of crops or varieties.
Yes.
Okay. Intercrop fields or beds with non-host plants.
Yeah.
Okay. Basic prevention. Okay, now we'll talk about, okay, do you have in place basic preventative practices of sanitation, cleaning up at the end of a crop cycle, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Okay. Use of approved insecticides. Used infrequently based on monitoring.
Yes.
Okay. Pest specific.
Are you asking me if what I use is pest specific?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so for example, BT is specific for lepidop larvae.
Yep.
Used frequently?
No.
Okay. Broad spectrum?
No.
Excellent. Okay. All right. I will add a few notes down here based upon your kind of your plans moving ahead, but I think that covers the pest section.
Sure.
Okay, now let's turn our attention to diseases and disease management. So as is the case with insects, monitoring is very important to catch diseases at an early stage. Tell me about your monitoring for diseases.
It is on the same timeline as monitoring for pests. On our harvest sheet, there is a section specifically for notes, so I'd like to actually amend what I said about writing stuff down. Occasionally, things get written down in the notes for harvest, and that's where we would put if we notice a disease or a fungus or a pest, something we don't recognize or we need to document.
So what specifically would be in a record entry, say related to a disease?
Maybe first time you see a cucumber beetle, even if you don't see anything actually wilting from bacterial wilt, if you see a cucumber beetle, you know it's coming. So that would be like, okay, we need to get ahead of that. Maybe close up our hoop house.
Okay, so you not only note the problem, but you also are thinking about what this means as far as management.
Right.
Yeah.
Going back to immediate action upon noticing.
And again, the farm is young. As you move ahead, do you intend to use these records to help inform farming practices in the future?
Very much so.
Okay. Let's see. Connecting monitoring with management practices. So again, management is based mostly on real-time monitoring of insect population or crop damage.
Yeah.
It's an accurate statement. Okay. And then, again, the farm is young, but moving ahead, management is based on records of previous monitoring.
Yes.
So that'll be the case. Okay. All right, here's our checklist. Adjusted planting schedules for disease management.
Yes.
Okay. Cover crops to break disease cycles. Okay. Extended crop rotation.
Yes.
Plant spacing for airflow.
Yes. I'm not starting off that way, but if I notice problems, I will spread out my spacing.
Okay. Pruning plants for airflow.
Yes.
Okay. Adjusted irrigation schedules to reduce leaf wetness.
Yeah.
Okay. Use of drip tape to limit leaf wetness. Okay. Manual removal and disposal of diseased tissue or plants.
That's our primary method.
Okay. Physical barriers such as a high tunnel or some other way to modify the environment.
Yeah.
Okay. Selecting disease-resistant varieties.
Yes.
Diversity of crops varieties.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Intercrop fields or beds with non-host plants. Okay. Manage non-crop host plants.
Yes.
Okay. Do you do basic preventative practices that involve sanitation? In other words, removing diseased plant parts, cleaning up at the end of cycles, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. Okay. And when it's really bad, I'll bring out the flame weeder and give a little blast.
Okay. Use of approved fungicides. Have you used any fungicides?
Well, neem is technically a fungicide.
True.
So in its capacity, with the BT, I have used it.
So you would say used infrequently based on monitoring?
Yes.
Okay. Disease specific?
On that one, I wouldn't say that's disease specific. It was just for the viscosity.
Used frequently?
No.
Okay. All right. I think that takes care of the disease section. Any questions on your part?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Hazel pine has a strong commitment to sustainability and disease management, and that is very evident here in the high tunnel. The high tunnel itself is a great example of a way that the farm is modifying the environment to make these plants less susceptible to diseases. Anything that keeps free moisture off of the foliage or off of the fruit will result in fewer disease issues. Secondly, taking a look at the choice of cultivars. The cultivars that are grown in this high tunnel have multiple disease resistance in them. So in other words, they're less prone to those diseases because of their genetic makeup. A third thing to look at is the training practices. These tomatoes are being trained to twine in a very upright position. This encourages good air movement around the plant, again, reducing the time in which foliage and fruit are wet and reducing susceptibility to diseases. Another important aspect is the irrigation system. In this case, drip or trickle systems are used, which places the water exactly where it's needed at the root systems of the plant, but doesn't splash water up onto the foliage or onto the fruit. And then finally, as these plants grow, they will be pruned. The lower foliage will be removed, again, enhancing air movement around and under the plants, resulting in fewer disease issues. Kevin, the next area we're going to discuss is preventing contamination, because certainly what happens on the farm is important, but also keeping problems from outside the farm, coming onto the farm to impact CNG standards is important as well. And so let's talk about first of all, some of the practices that help meet CNG standards. Buffer zones. And so buffer zones are areas where there's a separation, a physical separation between the CNG certified farm and what's going on around the farm. So tell me about buffer zones here at your farm.
Well, I do definitely have a very clear west and south buffer zone. This fence here dividing myself and my neighbor is a buffer zone. And then there's probably about maybe a 25 foot to 30 foot wide permaculture, food forest style perennial area on the west.
Mm-hmm. What about on the other sides of the farm? Well, you've got, near as I can tell, you have a very nice buffer here on the east side from the standpoint of an open area where nothing is going on that would impact CNG standards. What about on the other side?
Yeah, I've got a fence there as well.
Okay. So you're comfortable with your buffer zones?
I feel pretty good about it, yeah.
The CNG standard is a buffer zone of at least 20 feet, and I know we achieved that on certainly two sides of the farm. The other two sides with the fences, again, the reality of an urban farm is that you may not have the luxury of a full 20 feet, but you still have an adequate buffer with the fences in place. And it's helpful, of course, too, to have a conversation with neighbors and find out what they're doing as far as particularly chemical use.
Sure.
And how that might relate to maintaining CNG standard.
Well, that is also another added benefit of having another grower on the other side of my south fence, is that we discuss practices pretty frequently. And so I'm reassured and confident about the way he's growing food being not only good for his soil, good for the earth, and good for what I'm growing over here too.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm comfortable checking that this meets it because, again, we've got a buffer zone on two sides that's at least 20 feet, and then we have fences, barriers, on the other two sides that are higher than crops. Mm-hmm. So that meets the standard. Okay, let's talk about equipment, tools, and sprayers, because, again, it's important that equipment be focused on use in a CNG certified farm, and then if it goes off farm, that could certainly impact the certification of the farm itself.
Yeah.
So all equipment, tools, or sprayers are used only for CNG areas. That would be one option. The second option is that if they are used on a CNG certified farm and then taken to a non-certified farm for use, that they be thoroughly cleaned before being brought back to the CNG certified area. So which of those two statements would you say?
I don't think our tools have ever left.
Okay, so they're pretty much dedicated to the CNG certified farm. Excellent. Okay, something that we have to be thinking about too, this is a relatively new farm, and likely we'll be looking at a transitional certification here, because it's important to be able to certify that no synthetic fertilizers or pesticides have been used for the past 36 months. Now, if you could say that that's the case, then we could go for full certification. But what are your thoughts on that?
I could find out that information from the previous homeowner, and I don't think that would be too difficult.
Okay, I'll make a note here about that, and then we can, based on what you find out, then we can decide whether to go for a full certification or a transitional certification.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, very good. I think that's all we need to do as far as preventing contamination. Any questions there?
I don't think I do have any questions.
Okay. Now let's talk about seeds and planting stock. So as far as the inputs from the standpoint of seeds, transplants, other things that you might be planting here at Hazel Pine, the options we have are all seeds are CNG certified organic or verified to be grown according to CNG standards. Nearly all seeds would meet those standards, and rare use of conventional seeds, or some conventional seeds are used, allowed only with applicable exceptions. So how would you characterize your planting stock?
Well, originally we were anticipating getting CNG certified in year 2, not year 1, and for that reason we decided to use all of the old seed that we couldn't use for our other site to just not be wasteful, and to just use it here. So it's a probably, I'd call it about 50-50 as far as seeds go. As far as transplants go, it's almost 100% certified organic, because I am using like leftover starts from our other location, which is certified naturally grown already. Okay, so that 50-50 mix of seed, that would be 50% are organic or CNG certified, and the other 50% are not. Okay, and then transplants 100%. Okay. Moving forward, of course, that's going to change. Okay. Okay. We have a checklist related to crop diversity. So do you maintain a high level of crop diversity and or crop varieties? I believe so. Okay. Mixed cropping? Yeah. Companion planting? Absolutely. Absolutely. Open pollinated varieties? Okay. The seeds saved on farm? No, I have not done that. Okay. And I probably won't. Okay. Moderate level, okay, yeah, so that meets those there, very good. The reason being we don't have very much square footage to begin with, and letting things produce viable seeds takes way too much time of bed use for our application. Okay. I will include some notes in here on this section relative to the choice of seeds, again, based upon being frugal and showing good stewardship of seeds that you had on hand. I think you're in great shape as far as the transplant production, though, so very good. Any questions on seeds or transplants? I don't think so. Okay. All right, now let's talk about the environment. So the CNG certainly is focused on things such as inputs, the use of chemicals, etc., but it's also focused on sustainability of the farm. And so there are some areas that are important to discuss here too. Let's start with the sources of energy used on the farm. So we have, for example, no on-farm use of fossil fuels. Is that an accurate statement? That actually is an accurate statement. All of our mowing equipment and any power tools or anything like that, it's all battery powered. Okay. What about the BCS? Yep, that one time that I used the BCS here. Okay. But other than that, your there's current practices, no fossil fuels. Excellent. Do you intend to utilize wind energy? No. Solar? Yeah, I actually have a 4 kilowatt solar system over behind you. Okay. Biofuel? Probably not. Geothermal? Probably not. Okay. Some other practices, do you have systems in place to reduce tractor passes? Yeah, certainly. By not having them at all. Not having them at all. Equipment maintenance to improve efficiency? Yes. Okay. Energy efficient appliances? Yeah. Okay. Energy efficient lighting, cooling, and heating? Yes. Okay. And that includes the greenhouse that we have that is fed by this solar setup. Evaluating steps to reduce energy consumption or reliance on non-renewable energy. In other words, you're not only focusing on current practices, but you have a plan in place to perhaps even further reduce your reliance. I haven't developed that for Hazel Pine yet, but I intend to do so. Okay. All right, so some other things to think about from the standpoint of maintaining the resources of the farm. Do you use heavy mulching? Yeah. Okay. Rainwater harvesting? Yes, but not for our annual production. Okay. Contouring
And or earth shaping for rainwater capture?
Yeah, we have in our perennial areas.
Okay. Drip tape?
Yes, sir.
Modular overhead sprinkler systems?
I'm not sure what the word modular would mean in this particular case, but I do use an overhead sprinkler for germination.
Okay. But I think what they're talking about there is that it would be a setup where you're just watering the areas intended to be watered and you're not spreading water elsewhere. Yes, okay. Are you considering steps to reduce water use and develop a plan to do so in the near future?
I believe that we have started off using water about as efficiently as possible through trial and error on other sites.
Okay. All right, let's talk about your waste streams. All waste is composted, recycled, or upcycled?
I would say most, that is true. If there's a particularly sinister looking leaf, I may toss it in the trash.
Okay, so we could probably say an accurate statement is moderate steps taken to reduce, recycle, or upcycle non-degradable waste.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have in place a plan to reduce waste and develop, or do you have in place a plan to reduce waste both in the present and in the future?
Philosophically, but not on paper.
Okay. All right, so some other things we might think about relative to the farm and its the way that it's designed. Do you conserve habitat areas on the farm?
Absolutely.
Do you protect wetlands, woodlands, or grasslands? Again, it's an urban farm. It's
right. Yeah, I don't know that applies.
So that's probably not applicable. Ensuring generous vegetative buffers to waterways. You probably don't have a waterway here, do you? Okay. Controlling invasive species.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Creating habitat for endangered or rare species.
I haven't deliberately set out to do that.
Okay.
But that may happen by just having habitat.
Manage field edges for native species.
Yeah.
Okay. Using live hedges.
I wouldn't say that I do that.
Okay. Pollinator plantings.
Yes.
Reducing tillage or other disturbances.
Yes.
And selecting cover crops to support pollinators.
Yeah.
Okay. What would be an example of that?
Buckwheat.
Buckwheat. Excellent. Okay. I'll add a few notes in here too, again, relative to our discussion, and particularly on, and there'll be a place too where you put together a sustainability plan as part of your inspection, where you can talk about some of these things that might be taking place moving ahead.
Sure.
But I think you've got a good plan in place from the standpoint of environmental management here at the farm. Biodiversity is a critical part of a sustainable farm, and Certified Naturally Grown certainly recognizes that. Hazel pine has these areas that have been developed at the edges of the farm to support biodiversity, both pollinator habitat and habitat for beneficial insects. Kevin, tell us a little bit about this area.
Sure. Well, we planted these fruit trees 5 years ago. We have 9 fruit trees, which include some pawpaws, there's persimmons, some apples, mulberries, and around those originally were planted some guilds of just sort of beneficial plants to, to bring what we needed around those trees. We also have lots of clover. There's dynamic accumulators like comfrey out here, which, send out big root, pull stuff out from really deep, and then we would just drop the leaves, making those nutrients available to plants around it. We tried to, in the design, think of all of the layers of a forest from the canopy, which was going to be this mulberry tree. It's not looking so hot these days. And all the way down to the ground cover. This has been sort of the experimental zone for different things. Recently we've gotten into grafting, beginning with these pawpaws, which now each have 3 different cultivars of pawpaw fruit on them. But we also had a lot of volunteer trees that came up here, like some invasive mulberries, but rather than digging them out, we just hacked them off, got some cyanwood from this existing mulberry, the fruit of which we really enjoy, and grafted them onto the rootstock of these native mulberries. We did that because, as I mentioned before, this mulberry, it has some sores. I'm not exactly sure what's going on with it, but I want to make sure that I get to enjoy its fruit for years to come. So that was sort of our way of prolonging its life.
Well, it's a small thing, but it is an important part of sustainability, is using the assets that you have. For example, all of these wild mulberries that have grown up here, well, you could look at those as weeds and chop them out, or you could look at them as rootstocks. And we can graft improved mulberries onto them that will generate a crop of berries then for our enjoyment.
Yeah.
What I like about this area here, again, is that there's a diversity of plant species, which of course is key to supporting a diversity of beneficial insects and other organisms that are helpful on the farm. And again, as Kevin mentioned, we have different layers all the way from the tree canopy down to the ground cover. We're able to support a wide range of beneficials in this space. It's a relatively small space, but it's hugely important from the standpoint of the farm. Okay. Okay, non-CNG crops and materials. Does the grower sell any produce that they do not grow?
Nope.
Okay. Okay, for the record, okay, never mind. You're not excluding any crops from CNG certification, are you?
Well, I actually had some questions surrounding that. If the perennial system on the west side, if that was included, because I am using kind of a grazing paddock for chickens, and wanted to discuss how that played out.
Well, I think the big concern would be related to manure applied close to harvest if you were intending to harvest anything that's produced in that area.
Including the fruit from fruit trees?
Yeah, you have to adhere to the 90-day
Right.
exclusion from the standpoint of crops where the harvested part doesn't come into contact with the soil. So that would be a consideration. You don't necessarily have to CNG certify that part of the farm, and if you want to exclude it, you could certainly do that. But from the standpoint of produce food safety, you still want to adhere to that 90-day
absolutely.
interval with anything harvested from that area. But so in your plan, would you like to exclude that area?
I would like to exclude that area.
So how do you describe that area?
I would call it a small food forest.
Okay.
We have 9 fruit trees back there with guild surrounding it, and then it's got lots of native species.
Okay. Are there any other practices or materials that do not adhere to CNG standards that you want to talk about?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So overall, I'm impressed with what you've accomplished here in that short period of time. I don't have any serious concerns to CNG status. I think the only question is whether or not you want full status or transitional status, and that's based upon the inputs in the past 36 months.
For sure.
But I'll again, as your inspector, I'll go through and add some notes to these various sections based on our conversations. Okay, so now we'll turn our attention to sustainability goals. And making CNG certification is important, but really the important thing is the sustainability of the farm. And CNG encourages farmers to have goals over and above what they're currently doing, because there's always more that we could do from the standpoint of sustainability on a farm. And so some of the things that a farmer might consider, again, is things related to soil, ways that we can further reduce erosive loss, ways that we can further build soil health, ways that we can reduce soil compaction. Water, water use efficiency especially, and maintaining water on the garden and reducing or eliminating runoff from the garden. Inputs, again, doing what you can to reduce inputs, and also when you do use inputs, trying to use inputs that are developed locally, either on the farm or sourced locally. Biodiversity is important. You made a strong commitment to that here, and I suspect you'll be enhancing that as you move ahead. Supporting biological cycles, again, habitat for pollinators, beneficial insects, that sort of thing. Energy efficiency is always important. You've made a strong commitment here in what you're already doing, and I suspect you'll be further building on that. Reducing, reusing, or recycling, very important to develop effective ways to manage waste streams. And then economic viability is, of course, important too. Certainly paying yourself a fair wage, but also the people who work on the farm as well. And I know you have a strong commitment to that based on our conversations in the past. Yeah. And then engaging the community, sharing the story. Not every farm has to be a training site, but I know Hazel Pine has a strong commitment to training the farmers of tomorrow. And that's a very important part of overall food system sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely.
So very good. So what what I'm going to ask you to do, we won't do this today, this is something it's like homework, for example, is to list 3 goals for improving sustainability of your operation, both the short term and the long term, and then discuss strategies to achieve these 3 goals. Well, in fact, we could probably do some of that today if you've got some ideas.
Let's jump into it.
Okay, well, let's start. Give me a goal for the farm.
Well, I don't know in the context that this has been actually stated, but this was not part of Springfield Community Gardens master plan. This garden is a direct response to the pandemic that we're all experiencing. We had some people who unfortunately lost their jobs, and we had some apprenticeship positions open. And so they live here on site, and they have been managing this. So it's been a great way for them to not only learn, but do. All of that being said, I maybe did 15% of all the total work here. This was all apprentice led. Mm-hmm. So talking about it as a training site, that's like the #1 thing.
Okay, so we could say directed education for farmers of tomorrow.
Right.
Okay. Your time frame for that? I know it's obviously ongoing, but as far as enhancement...
we're gonna have another set of 2 apprentices starting in September, so we'll probably do 2 a year ongoing.
Okay. And the steps necessary to make it happen. You've already got a process in place. You've got places for apprentices to live here. I think you're probably set it pretty well from that standpoint.
Right.
Okay. Excellent.
Awesome.
Okay, so what would be an example of a second goal that you would have in mind for Hazel Pine?
I would like to get an economic viability plan going, understanding how much we can produce here, what we're selling it for, where it's going to go, developing a business plan that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that Hazel Pine was established on kind of short notice, quite frankly, in response to a huge need based on COVID-19.
Yeah.
But I think you're right from the standpoint of the economic viability of the farm. It's important to have those pieces in place. And so what does your time frame look like as far as developing that?
I would like to have something like a complete business plan by the end of the year.
Okay. Very good. What would be an example of a third goal?
You know, I actually would like to increase the biodiversity here. I do think that we have a lot going on, but I think that we could definitely fit more in. I'd like to focus more on perennial systems and bring out more habitat into this annual cropping area.
Mm-hmm. So what are the steps necessary to make that happen?
Identifying which plants I'd like to put where for what reason, mm-hmm. and seeing how they work together would be probably the first place to go make a plan.
Okay. Anything else that needs to happen to make that happen?
Fall to come, so I can plant some trees.
So, in other words, not just IDing plants, but sourcing and planting plants,
yes.
Right? Okay. And what is your time frame for seeing progress on this?
I would like for it to be this fall.
Okay. Excellent. Well, these are three outstanding goals from the standpoint of improving sustainability. So just to run through them quickly, further developing the educational program here for new farmers and interns. Secondly, a focus on the economic goals of the farm with, again, the intent to have a business and marketing plan in place. And third, to increase biodiversity, and particularly looking at looking at perennial plantings and other types of plantings that would, again, enhance biodiversity here at Hazel Pine.
Yeah.
Excellent. Great job. Okay, I will go ahead and write those up. Actually, I'm going to let you write those up.
Okay.
And send those to me as part of the package that we will submit to Certified Naturally Grown.
Great.
Okay, that is the main part of the inspection, of the discussion. There's an inspector's report, which I will fill out. There's also a form here that where observers are invited to talk about the farm as well. You know, this is kept confidential, and it is a sort of thing where others can come and observe what's going on the farm and give input as well. And so that's something that can be done as well. The other parts of the form, there'll be a certification section that I fill out again to highlight our inspection time, the time we had together, the very interesting discussion that we had. And then I will submit this packet of information to Certified Naturally Grown for their. I said early on, I don't see any situations here that would preclude Certified Naturally Grown certification. You're doing a fantastic job here on the farm, Kevin. It's so impressive to see what's developed in a relatively short period of time.
Well, thank you. I do have to give a huge amount of credit to my staff at SCG that have been back and forth from other sites really helping me get this going. Oh, well, it's collaboration and cooperation among peers is critical to success in farming, and especially in establishing a new farm. And I, again, as an inspector, a CNG inspector, I'm impressed with not just what's happening now, but your plans for the future to enhance the sustainability of the farm here. Do you have any final questions before we conclude the inspection? I don't. I think I asked all my questions. Very good. Well, Kevin, thank you for joining me on this this inspection. Thank you for joining me on this video as well. Yeah, thanks for being here. Oh, okay, very good. Airshake.
Okay, Hannah, are we back? Very good. Okay. Well, that concludes the video, and it concludes the presentation. For more information on Certified Naturally Grown, I would certainly invite anyone to visit the Certified Naturally Grown website. The website is here on this slide, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. And Hannah, I think you mentioned there were no questions in the chat. Okay, very good. Well, please feel free to reach out in the future if you have questions related to Certified Naturally Grown or specialty crop production. My email is listed here on the slide. I serve Southwest Missouri, but I'm available for consultation from basically anywhere. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions or comments on this presentation. Hannah, do we have an evaluation for the presentation? Okay, have you dropped that into the chat? Okay, we would certainly appreciate everyone's cooperation by filling out this very short survey. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the workshop is funded with support from our USDA partners, and in exchange they ask for input on how effective the program is. And this is your chance to help us understand the program. First of all, to help me do a better job as your presenter, but also to help the USDA understand the impact of their support. So please take a few moments to click on the link that Hannah has dropped into the chat. We'll leave the Zoom link up for a few minutes so that everyone has a chance to do that. And then please fill out the survey and give us your feedback.